Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, December 2nd, 2022. President Joe Biden signing a bill into law that will prevent a railroad workers' strike. He had called on Congress to pass this bill to keep the hit from the economy from happening should a strike occur, and Congress responded this week. President Biden also lauding the November jobs report from the Labor Department, 263,000 jobs added in the month, more than most economists expected. Unemployment rate staying at 3.7%. That's a 50-year low. The Democratic National Committee Rules and Bylaws Committee approving a revamp of which states would go first in the 2024 presidential primary schedule. South Carolina will lead instead of Iowa, which has been the tradition for a number of decades. And beyond that, New Hampshire, Nevada, Georgia, and Michigan. We'll talk about what this means for the nominating process with Washington Examiner reporter David Drucker. Russian President Vladimir Putin responding to President Biden's saying that the two could talk if President Putin wants to end the war in Ukraine. And now President Putin has conditions of his own. We'll get the U.S. State Department reaction. And the U.S. House of Representatives passing a bill that funds sports services for new parents and their children. The bill named for the late Congresswoman Jackie Walorksi, Republican from Indiana, who had championed this issue. She died over the summer in a car crash. Now to President Biden on the economy, signing into law a bill to head off a freight rail workers' strike. The bill mandates that railroad companies and unions accept the labor contract that was negotiated through a federal mediation board a few months ago. A strike had been likely, according to analysts, because a few of the rail unions had rejected that agreement. President also speaking today about a separate bill that passed the U.S. House, but not the U.S. Senate, which would have changed the agreement and added 7 more paid sick days for rail workers. And the president at the White House commenting about the economy in general, including gas prices and the November jobs report.
The bill I'm about to sign ends a difficult rail dispute and helps our nation avoid what, without a doubt, would have been an economic catastrophe at a very bad time in the calendar. Our nation's rail system is literally the backbone of our supply chain, as you all well know, and so much of what we rely on is delivered on our rail, from clean water to food and gas and every other good. Rail shutdown would have devastated our economy. Without freight rail, many of the U.S. industries would literally shut down. In the event of a shutdown, my economic advisors report that as many as 765,000 Americans, many of them union members themselves, would have been put out of work for the first time, and within the first 2 weeks of the strike alone. Communities could have lost access to chemicals necessary to ensure clean drinking water. Farms and ranches across the country would have been unable to feed their livestock. And thanks to the bill Congress passed, and one I'm about to sign, we've spared the country that catastrophe. At the same time, we ensured workers are going to get a historic 24% wage increase over the next 5 years, improved working conditions, and peace of mind around their health care. And look, I know this bill doesn't have paid sick leave that these rail workers and frankly every worker in America deserves. But that fight isn't over. I didn't commit we were going to stop just because we couldn't get it in this bill that we were going to stop fighting for it. I've supported paid sick leave for a long time. I'm going to continue that fight till we succeed. And I want to thank Congress, Democrats and Republicans, for acting so quickly. I know this was a tough vote for members of both parties. It was a tough for me, but it was the right thing to do at the moment, to save jobs, to protect millions of working families from harm and disruption, and to keep supply chains stable around the holidays, and to continue the progress we've made and we continue to see on the economy. For months, you couldn't look anywhere without seeing headlines screaming, gas prices at the pump are up. But look, folks, gas prices are down. And you barely hear anything about it right now. They're continuing to go down. And there's a lot more that's going to happen. They're down more than $1.50 a gallon since the summer. And they continue to fall. And our economy continues to grow. The economic report, the GDP is up even more than it was previously thought. We continue to create jobs, lots of jobs. And today, we've learned that the economy added 263,000 jobs in November. Now, we've now created 10.5 million jobs since I took office, more than any administration in history at this point in the presidency. And 750,000 of them are domestic manufacturing jobs made in America. Unemployment rate remains near an all-time 50-year low, 3.7%. And wages for working families, I want to say this again, wages for working families, in fact, over the last couple months have gone up. These wage increases are larger than the increase in inflation during that same period of time. And so we're in a position now where things are moving. They're moving in the right direction.
President Biden at the White House. On that jobs report from the Labor Department and that note about the wage gains, Associated Press writing in November, average hourly pay jumped 5.1% compared with a year ago, a robust increase that is welcome news for workers, but one that makes the Federal Reserve's efforts to curb inflation potentially more difficult. The strength of the hiring and pay gains raised immediate concerns that the Fed may now have to keep interest rates high even longer than many had assumed. That from Associated Press. Wall Street reaction to the jobs report, the Dow up 34, NASDAQ down 20, S&P down 4. While the unemployment rate is at its lowest level in decades, 3.7%, inflation remains near its highest level in decades. The Consumer Price Index in October was 7.7% year over year. Congressman John Rutherford, Republican from Florida, speaking on the House floor today about who he believes is to blame and how things may change in a month when Republicans take majority control of the House.
Food is up over 12%. Energy and gas are both up over 17%. Electricity is up 14%. Public transportation, which many of our working poor depend. Public transportation is up 28%. Flour is up 24%. Chicken is up 14%. Eggs are up an incredible 43%. Finally, milk is up 14%. Everything is more expensive under this Biden administration. And you know why? Because this administration believes we can spend our way out of this problem. But that very reckless spending is what got us here in the first place. The value of the dollar cannot recover if we just continue printing money. In the last 2 years, what we've seen with one party, one rule in just 2 years, and I would ask people to just reflect back, if you can, to the economy that this country was enjoying in 2019, before the pandemic shut down our economy, before COVID destroyed an economy that was the best this country had ever seen. The Trump economy was growing, the GDP was growing at over 3.5%. Now, what do we face after one party, one rule for 2 years? Higher interest rates on our federal debt that's now at a record level, 31 trillion plus. We passed an American Rescue Plan that the Democrats gave us $1.9 trillion, over $1 trillion in Biden executive order spending. The Inflation Reduction Act, which is kind of a misnomer, obviously, spent another $745 billion. And then finally, most recently, another $500 billion for student loan cancellation. This spending is not sustainable. Well, the good news is that the American public chose not to accept this, and they put an end to one party, one rule. And come January, we will put an end to that. Hopefully, we can get back to that 2019 economy.
Congressman John Rutherford, Republican from Florida, today on the House floor. House Republicans continuing to fill out their leadership positions in anticipation for the next Congress when they'll be in the majority. Tom Emmer from Minnesota was elected as the majority whip and today announcing that Congressman Guy Reichenthal, Republican from Pennsylvania, will be his chief deputy whip. The Democratic National Committee's Rules and Bylaws Committee today voting to change the presidential nominating calendar for 2024, replacing what had been traditional for half a century. Iowa caucuses going first, then New Hampshire's primary. DNC Chair Jamie Harrison at the start of the meeting saying the goal is to better reflect the diversity of the Democratic Party and the country, and states were encouraged to apply to be allowed to hold primaries early on.
This has been a thorough, open, and transparent process. The committee has held 9 public meetings, along with 4 public listening sessions and an online portal for public feedback. 20 states applied to be in the early window, and in June, 16 states and Puerto Rico were chosen to present their case about why they should be moved to the early state window. So with that, I know we will have a spirited discussion today as we work to finalize our 2024 pre-window period. And again, I want to recognize and thank all of our state parties for presenting us with such a difficult decision. However, my friends, the Rules and Bylaws Committee proceeds as a committee. We have gained a much better understanding of the broad diversity of our Democratic electorate, and I believe that this will make us better organizers, supporters, and leaders. As we move forward with an early window that reflects the diversity of our party, creates a more equitable and accessible nomination process, and puts our candidates in the best position to win, I look forward to working with all of you in continuing to grow and strengthen our party.
Democratic National Committee Chair Jamie Harrison at the start of today's Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting in Washington, D.C. Minion Moore is a committee co-chair. She then read a letter from President Biden outlining his priorities and principles in this process. And then, before a vote, Ms. Moore summarizing the president's suggestions of which states should go first. In 2024, they did approve what the president wanted.
The proposed early window package of South Carolina on February 6th, Nevada and New Hampshire on February 13th, Georgia on February 20th, and Michigan on February 27th is based on the testimony of the committee, the applications of the states, and the principles within the resolution we passed earlier this year. We feel strongly that this window that reflects our values, paints a vibrant picture of our nation, and creates a strong process that will result in the best Democratic nominee. And, as you all know, to have a system that works and provides stability for future presidential campaigns, the window cannot be decided piecemeal. The logistics of this window will be something we need to navigate as a committee, but I agree with the President that this is a bold window that reflects the values of our party, and it is a window worth fighting for. As we begin this discussion, I'd also like to start by thanking state parties for the time and effort they poured into their applications. During this process, it was truly remarkable to hear just how diverse our party is. I know we have all found the information we've learned over this cycle to be informative and inspiring. Our state parties have not left us with an easy decision, and we are looking forward to engaging in this conversation today.
Minion Moore is co-chair of the Democratic National Committee's Rules and Bylaws Committee at today's meeting. David Drucker, a senior political correspondent with the Washington Examiner, has been following this discussion, joining us now by phone. Thank you so much. So we've got South Carolina, Georgia, and Michigan moving up. Iowa no longer first. How does this change the nominating process?
Well, look, it's a big change after decades of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada then interjected in there. South Carolina demoted to fourth, essentially, some years back. South Carolina is now going to vote first, and I think there are two big implications here. One, you've got the part of the Democratic base that is the influential black vote now has the first say in the process. And I think that's a really big deal. Related to this, it was the South Carolina Democratic black vote that saved Joe Biden's campaign in the 2020 primary. They're now voting first in 2024, and presumably, unless the calendar were to be upended again for 2028 ongoing, but let's just talk about 2024. If Biden's thinking about running for re-election, this makes a lot of sense because the first primary is going to be one where he should excel and excel immensely, which means if anybody thinks of challenging him, or if there were to be tea leaves by looking at, he won, but, he didn't get what you would expect from an unopposed incumbent, essentially. South Carolina is a place where he shouldn't have any problems with any of that. And so his decision, and it was his decision to not just keep South Carolina in the mix, which they were always going to be, but to have them vote first is a really big deal. And then you see Georgia and Michigan put into the mix of early states. These are states with urban populations, with suburban populations, with very ethnically and racially diverse populations, lots of universities. So you're getting a better reflection of where the Democratic base is today. And look, you're getting some states that are a little bit bigger, that haven't done this before. And so I think Democratic activists, I think the party's going to be happier by the mix of voters that they're going to be courting in the primary. But it'll be interesting to see how voters in Michigan and Georgia, Democratic voters, react to their new status. For all the criticism of Iowa and New Hampshire of being too white, not urban enough, and other things that had kind of made their status as the few early states less tenable for Democrats, understandably, their voters took this role and this responsibility very seriously in terms of vetting candidates, kicking the tires. They show up to every town hall. They don't care if it's raining or snowing. It's a very big deal for them, and it'll be interesting to see how voters in Georgia and Michigan take to this new opportunity.
We're talking with David Drucker from the Washington Examiner. I guess implied in all of this discussion, and it might be obvious to some, but it's worth asking the question, why is going first or near the beginning important?
It's a good question because the Iowa caucuses have been first for years for both Democrats and Republicans, and winning the Iowa caucuses doesn't translate into the presidency. Very often it doesn't. But if you can win the first primary, it creates lots of momentum. It can lead to a big rush in fundraising, and you immediately establish yourself as a serious contender for the nomination overall. And so any state that goes first, it's the first opportunity to prove yourself. It's going to be coveted, and candidates are going to spend a lot of time in these states trying to win the first contest, even though over the years we've learned that often the first state, at least when it's been the Iowa caucuses, hasn't necessarily been a guarantor of the nomination, let alone victory in the general election. And so it'll be interesting to see, and I don't think 2024, unless Biden decides not to run for re-election, we won't really know how South Carolina functions in this regard because Biden, if he's running, will be unopposed or generally unopposed, most likely. And, of course, Republicans are going to keep their same schedule. So South Carolina is still going to vote third. And, I'd add one more thing. Over the years, if you look at it by the numbers, there's an argument that both for Democrats and Republicans, New Hampshire and South Carolina voting second and third, or in the case of the Democratic Party, fourth in recent years, have had a bigger impact in their positions of voting second, third, and fourth than has Iowa. And so all of a sudden they're first. You can tell from the DNC chairman's remarks today, he's a South Carolinian, what an honor it is and how pleased they are to have to be put in this position. But it'll be interesting to see over time if it changes things, if South Carolina is as influential voting first as it has been, at least on the Democratic side, voting third and fourth.
The Democratic National Committee saying that they want to do this, but what now has to happen at the state level And in some cases, Republicans are controlling those states to make this happen.
Well, look, primaries tend to be the purview of the parties. And I tend to think that if you're a Republican Party in a particular state, why are you going to argue with a bunch of money flowing into your state, even if it's the other party that is the cause of it, right? So if you're Georgia, why would you get in the way of this? If you're Brian Kemp, you're going to see a rush of ad dollars into the state. You're going to see a rush of people traveling into the state to campaign, to cover the campaign, to hold events. I mean, overall, it's really good business. And in Michigan, you have Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat. She's not going to stand in the way of any of this. Nevada's order is rejiggered, but incoming Governor Joe Lombardo, Republican, he's not going to have any reason to mess with this, especially because Nevada is an early Republican state, just maybe votes in a different order. So I don't think there's really anything to worry about from the perspective of Republicans messing with the Democratic calendar because there's just no reason for them to do so. And, these things go back and forth, right? They're going to want to make changes or they're going to want to have their calendar the way they want it. They're not going to want to set the precedent where a Democratic governor or legislature would mess with them, out of revenge or something like that.
David Drucker is a senior political correspondent at the Washington Examiner. His stories at WashingtonExaminer.com and on Twitter at David M. Drucker. Thank you very much.
Anytime. Thank you.
When the Democratic National Committee Rules and Bylaws Committee voted to change the presidential nominating state order for the Democrats in 2024, it passed by voice vote today, but there were objections from the representatives from Iowa and New Hampshire, which had been the traditionally first states. New Hampshire Secretary of State putting out a statement that New Hampshire has a law that requires we hold our presidential primary at least 7 days before any similar nominating event. Our first-in-the-nation primary is part of our culture and has been in place for over 100 years. We will continue to follow the law and honor our tradition. And the chair of the Republican Party of Iowa releasing a statement. This is an unserious alternative from an unserious president. The DNC and Joe Biden have just kicked off utter chaos. This is just a recommendation, and the fight is not over. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre asked today about President Biden's pushing for South Carolina to go first.
Clyburn said today that he received a phone call from the president last night informing him of his decision to pick South Carolina first for the primary calendar, and that he was pleasantly surprised. I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of how the president arrived at his decision, who he consulted, with any timeline on that, and how he got to that.
As you know, we take the law very seriously here, and it places strict limits on what I can say about the future elections and political party process. So here's what I can say. As a candidate in 2020, and as we have heard the night of the New Hampshire primary, you heard directly from the president, Joe Biden at that time made clear that to him, respecting our diversity as a nation and breaking down barriers for all our people is a foundational principle. He believes that that's what Democrats in office stand for, and he has upheld the principle as president. He promised his administration would look like America, and it does. He has staffed the most diverse cabinet in White House history, American history. He promised to fight to ensure our judicial branch reflects America, and he has. He's confirmed more black women to appellate judgeships than all of his predecessors combined, and he fulfilled his promise to confirm that the first black woman to the Supreme Court. He works to honor the values in every way that he can as a leader. I'm not going to get into specific conversations that he may have had with the congressman, but again, I just laid out how the president thinks about this process.
That's the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters on Air Force One. The name Clyburn referring to Congressman Jim Clyburn, Democrat from South Carolina. Again, the DNC committee today approving the new order of states in the presidential primary process for 2024 for the Democrats, but the full DNC will need to ratify this at their winter meeting. This is Washington Today. And now to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Reuters reports that President Vladimir Putin is open to negotiations on Ukraine, but the West must recognize Russia's new territories, the Kremlin said on Friday, a day after U.S. President Joe Biden said he was willing to talk if President Putin were looking for a way to end the war. President Putin has proclaimed the southern region of Kherson and 3 other partly occupied regions of Ukraine to be part of Russia, in a move condemned as illegal by most countries. That from Reuters. State Department spokesman Ned Price speaking about this in a teleconference with reporters.
We have been very clear that the United States and countries around the world will never, 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 never recognize territory that Russia has illegally annexed, either in 2014 or more recently as part of its illegal and now brutal aggression against Ukraine. We have been crystal clear about that. What the president said yesterday is that if President Putin is ready to end this war in Ukraine, we're prepared to engage in diplomacy, including by potentially speaking with President Putin. The president noted he would do that in close coordination with NATO, our NATO allies. We've noted before that everything will be done in close coordination with Ukraine. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Obviously, it appears very clear, including from the comments today from the Kremlin, but more pointedly from the actions of the Russian Federation in recent weeks, including its brutal assault against the people of Ukraine, including its escalation by targeting energy infrastructure across Ukraine that powers the country, that provides for the well-being of the Ukrainian people with water, with heat, with essential services. The Russians have made it very clear that, of course, they are not in the mood for constructive dialogue and for constructive diplomacy. So together with our partners and our allies, we're focused on holding Russia accountable for their actions, on supporting Ukraine as they defend themselves against this Russian aggression, and on mitigating the impacts of President Putin's war on the rest of the world. Secretary General Stoltenberg, for those of you who were in Romania with us, put it this way. He made the point that while it may seem paradoxical, the best thing the international community can do to help bring about a diplomatic end to this war is to continue providing our Ukrainian partners with the security assistance that they need to defend their sovereignty, to defend their democracy, to defend their territorial integrity. Not only does providing that security assistance, not only will it help change the battlefield conditions, incentivizing the Russians to take part in genuine diplomacy, something they have not been willing to do thus far, but ultimately it will also strengthen Ukraine's hand at the negotiating table if and when that negotiating table emerges. You pair those comments from the Secretary General with the comments that President Zelensky has repeatedly made about his willingness to engage in diplomacy towards a just and durable peace, and that speaks to the strategy that we're continuing to implement. Holding Russia to account, supporting Ukraine with the security assistance that it needs, and working with the rest of the world to mitigate the implications that are being felt by the rest of the world of President Putin's aggression against Ukraine.
State Department spokesman Ned Price in a teleconference with reporters today. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba telling CNN that a series of letters containing explosives or animal parts are meant to terrorize Ukrainian diplomats around the world. He says there have been at least 17 cases of embassies receiving either letter bombs, false letter bombs, or letters containing animal parts like the eyes of cows and pigs. And this from CNBC, the European Union on Friday agreed to cap Russian seaborne oil prices at $60 a barrel after several days of intense negotiations over an appropriate level. The announcement comes after the G7 group of advanced economies agreed in September to impose a limit on Russian seaborne crude and therefore constrain revenues the Kremlin makes from the commodity. Now to China and COVID. Another article from Reuters begins further easing of COVID-19 testing requirements and quarantine rules in some Chinese cities was met with a mix of relief and worry on Friday, as hundreds of millions await an expected shift in national virus policies after widespread social unrest. The looser measures were welcomed by workers frustrated by 3 years of economically damaging curves, but have jolted others who suddenly feel more exposed to a disease authorities had consistently described as deadly until this week. Dr. Anthony Fauci, about to retire after a long career as the head of U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, interviewed this week by the Washington Post and asked about China's zero COVID policy.
I want to turn for a moment to some sort of news of the day. We're seeing these unprecedented protests in China right now over the severe zero COVID policy and the lockdowns that have been imposed throughout the country for going on 3 years now. What do you make of the protests, and what do you think of China continuing to try to maintain this approach to COVID?
Well, again, Yasmin, I'm not going to get involved in China politics, but I can address some of the principles that you're alluding to. If you're going to put restrictions on society, there needs to be an end game and a purpose of why you're doing it that is aimed ultimately at opening up society in a safe way to protect your citizens. What we're seeing from the beginning was a very, very stringent restriction and lockdown that never would have been, and certainly should not have been, accepted in the United States, where you actually lock people in their homes and punish them if they come out. If you're going to do something like that, it should be in order to give you time to respond so that you can open up. And let me give you some examples. If you were in the pre-vaccine era and you were seeing your hospitals overrun, you were going to want to regroup, get more beds, get more ventilators, get more PPE so that you can handle the onslaught of cases. Lockdown like that should only be a temporary issue to allow you to do something in a positive way. In the era of vaccination, you might want to restrict until you can get your population in totality vaccinated, particularly the highly vulnerable elderly individuals. But as it turned out, that's not what happened. The vaccination of the elderly has not been well performed, and the vaccine they have has been not a particularly effective vaccine. So it kind of defies the principle, Yasmin, that if you're going to do something as draconian as that, do it for a purpose, an end game. But that's not happening because, at least from what we're hearing, they're not essentially broadly getting all the vulnerable elderly people vaccinated, which is what they should be doing.
And my understanding is they're also not allowing citizens to get vaccines other than the Sinovac vaccine, not Pfizer or Moderna or any of the other more effective ones.
Well, that's what I'm hearing, Yasmin. I haven't verified that, but I'm hearing it from a number of sources, which is unfortunate because it just so happens that the efficacy of the China-made vaccines are not at the level of the vaccines that have been used in the United States, particularly the mRNA vaccines of Moderna and Pfizer.
Dr. Anthony Fauci is director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and chief White House science advisor. For now, he is retiring this month after 50 years in government, interviewed Thursday by Washington Post White House reporter Yasmin Abu-Tabalib. Thursday, December 1st, was also World AIDS Day, and today Secretary of State Antony Blinken talking about U.S. assistance fighting AIDS worldwide at a meeting in Washington, D.C. of the Business Council for International Understanding. Secretary Blinken saying that through PEPFAR, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which began in 2003, the U.S. has invested over $100 billion in the global HIV/AIDS response in over 50 countries, saving 25 million lives. He says going forward, more needs to be done to meet President Biden's goal of ending the AIDS/HIV epidemic by 2030.
Even as we celebrate the successes of PEPFAR, we must not lose sight of the very serious work still required for us to end the global HIV health epidemic by 2030. Infection rates are again rising in many parts of the world. The UNAIDS report that was released just this week confirmed that persistent inequities continue to threaten progress for children, for young women and girls, and other at-risk populations, such as the LGBTQI+ people who use drugs, and sex workers. Too many countries still have fragile and insufficiently resourced public health systems, which makes it difficult to offer services beyond HIV/AIDS treatments, and that undercuts our capacity to respond to emerging threats. We now have a new 5-year PEPFAR strategy. We launched it yesterday, and the primary purpose of that strategy is to fill those gaps. Among other efforts, PEPFAR will invest in targeted programming to reduce inequities among underserved populations, like young women and girls. It will partner with more local organizations, faith-based, women, minority-led groups, which have trusted relationships with hard-to-reach communities. It will connect countries with development finance, commercial banks, so that they can build their own regional manufacturing capabilities for antiretrovirals, for diagnostic tests, for personal protective gear. Giving countries the capacity to meet their own challenges so that they're not dependent on anyone else. And indeed, not only the capacity to meet their own challenges, but to help others meet theirs. That is a powerful thing to do and vitally important.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a World AIDS Day event in Washington, D.C., hosted by the Business Council for International Understanding. World AIDS Day was first observed on December 1st, 1988, and is considered the longest-running disease awareness initiative of its kind in the history of public health. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio just got easier. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern, important congressional hearings and other public affairs events throughout the day, and weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Catch Washington Today for a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
And welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and also on the C-SPAN Now app. It is free. Emotional day in the House of Representatives with debate and passage of the Jackie Walorksi Maternal and Child Home Visiting Reauthorization Act of 2022, named for the late Congresswoman Jackie Walorski, Republican from Indiana, who died in a traffic accident in August. The bill reauthorizes a program providing support services for new parents and their children from before birth through kindergarten for 5 years, increasing annual funding to $800 million in 2027. Speaking in favor of the bill, Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Republican from Missouri, who says Jackie Walorski was her best friend.
I rise in strong support of H.R. 8876, the Jackie Walorski Maternal and Child Home Visiting Reauthorization Act. I'd like to commend Chairman Neal, Chairman Davis, Ranking Member Brady, and all the members on Ways and Means for bringing this legislation to the floor and honoring our late colleague and my dearest friend, a selfless servant, Jackie Walorski. The McVie program is backed by decades of research that prove home visits by a nurse, social worker, or other trained professionals during pregnancy and in the first year of a child's life supports positive parenting, improves maternal and child health, and promotes child development and school readiness. This program has proven vital to families in underserved communities, especially in my home state of Missouri. Life is a beautiful and precious gift, and all babies deserve the opportunity to thrive. Women need a strong support system as they navigate the miracles and the challenges of motherhood. This legislation that embodies my dear friend Jackie Walorski was very close to her heart. It will give women, especially the most vulnerable, the support they need to build a happy, healthy future for their children. Right now, Jackie Walorski is shining down on this institution and on the people of Indiana's 2nd District. All our love to her dear husband, Dean, her mother, Mert, and all of those that served with her. I yield back the balance of my time.
Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Republican from Missouri, on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 390 to 26. It now heads to the Senate. This is Washington Today. A headline at rollcall.com, Halls of Power Ball. New House members pick their offices via lottery. Incoming lawmakers groan and cheer through biennial tradition. There are 74 incoming U.S. representatives, and they, or members of their staff, if they could not make it, meeting today in the Cannon House office building for this ritual of picking a button with a number on it from a wooden box in hope of getting a low number and then being able to select a good office space in one of the 3 House office buildings, one that's spacious and well located. Before this all began, David Wilder, the House office building's superintendent in the architect of the Capitol's office, explaining the history and the process.
This is the first office building on the Hill, then called simply the House Office Building Number 1, and later renamed to the Cannon Building after Joseph Gurney Cannon, who was a speaker from 1903 to 1911. Prior to opening of this building, members worked from their desks in the House chamber or borrowed space in the committee rooms in the Capitol. On January 9th, 1908, members of the 60th Congress of the House of Representatives selected office assignments for the first time. With the construction of the House office building complete, members eagerly awaited their turn to choose an office. A blindfolded page drew marbles from a bag corresponding to a member's name, and then the member selected their new office from a chart. We've come a long way from marbles and charts, but the tradition continues today as we conduct the 58th lottery. The House Office Building Commission, also known as the HOBC, was created to oversee the construction of this very building back in March 3rd of 1903. The HOBC, which consists today of the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, and the Minority Leader, oversees the function of the House and its office buildings. The HOBC approves the lottery rules, procedures, and schedule which govern the execution of the lottery suite selection. The lottery and suite selection process has developed over time due to the diversity of spaces and amenities unique to each of the House office buildings. Before we begin a roll call and lottery this morning, I would like to review a few rules that govern this lottery and the suite selection process. Just remember, there's a reason for any and all rules, procedures, and or processes that have been approved by the House Office Building Commission. I've been asked what is the best office on the Hill, to which I answered the one the constituents elected you to. There are no bad offices in the People's House. This morning, after my remarks are complete, I will begin roll call by calling all member-elects' names alphabetically. When I call your name, please stand and say present, and then after the roll call is complete, we'll begin the lottery. The lottery drawing order for member-elects that participate in today's roll call will be determined by a computerized number generator. Then, starting at the top of the randomized drawing order, we will call your name and you will draw a number out of the box to determine your suite selection order. After completion of the lottery, the suite selection schedule will be posted in this room on the large screen behind me and online on the Congressional Transition Suite Selection website that can be accessed from the House network and found at congressionalmoves.aoc.gov. Please note the official clock is the suite selection website clock. The first suite selection will begin at 10 a.m., and each member-elect will have 5 minutes to make their selection.
David Wilder is the U.S. House Office Building's superintendent in the architect of the Capitol's office, speaking at the start of today's lottery for the new members of Congress coming in, the members-elect, to select office space. And it turned into a pretty lively event as it went through, as they came up to choose a button with a number on it out of the wooden box. Choosing number 1, Congressman-elect Max Miller of Ohio, a Republican. And the room erupted.
Mr. Miller. Number 1.
Part of the new member of Congress office lottery today. President Joe Biden meeting with Britain's Prince William today at the John F. Kennedy Library Museum in Boston. Prince William and Princess Kate visiting the U.S. for the first time in 8 years and the first time since the death of Queen Elizabeth. And tonight they're going to be at the Earthshot Prize ceremony, which awards $1 million prizes to winners of projects focused on resolving climate issues. Prince William said he was inspired by President Kennedy's moonshot. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with a preview as they flew up to Boston.
We are on our way to Boston, as all of you guys know, where President Biden will participate in a phone bank and a fundraiser for the DSCC and Senator Warnock. The Prince and Princess of Wales are also in town to host the Earthshot Prize. The President looks forward to spending time with Prince William at the JFK Library, where President Biden shared his vision to end cancer as we know it. We expect that they will discuss their shared climate goals, prioritization of mental health issues, and decreasing the burden of the disease.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre on Air Force One as they flew up with the president from Washington to Boston. The meeting between President Biden and Prince William was video only. They didn't make any comments, but we have the video at our website, cspan.org. U.S. men's soccer team continues its journey to glory at the World Cup tournament on Saturday in Qatar, playing the Netherlands in the round of 16. It's win or go home. Congressman Darren LaHood, Republican from Illinois, cheering on Team USA on the House floor today.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise on the House floor to congratulate the men's national soccer team on their win this past week against Iran at the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. After missing out on the 2018 World Cup, the United States returned this year for the first time in 8 years. With draws against Wales and England to start the group stage, the U.S. needed a crucial win against Iran to advance to the knockout stage. The U.S. team delivered a 1-0 victory with a stellar goal from Christian Pulisic and a staunch defensive performance from goalie Matt Turner. I know I join my colleagues here in the U.S. House of Representatives and fans across the country in congratulating the men's national soccer team. Throughout the World Cup, the team has shown class, respect, grit, and patriotism, inspiring a new generation of fans and youth across the country. Coach Greg Berhalter and the entire team have made our country so proud. I look forward to cheering them on tomorrow as they face the Netherlands. Go USA, beat the Dutch.
Congressman Darren LaHood, Republican from Illinois, on the House floor today. The U.S. men's national soccer team has won only one previous match in a World Cup knockout stage. That was beating Mexico in 2002. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.